Stephen Waslander is Associate Professor at the University of Toronto's Institute for Aerospace Studies and Director of Toronto Robotics and Artificial and Intelligence Lab. He joins us from Toronto. Hi, Professor. Thanks for being with us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
We know that General Motors is closing its Oshawa plant as part of kind of an overall plan, or at least a switch in focus to electric cars and self-driving cars. Where do things stand right now in Canada when it comes to self-driving cars actually becoming a reality?
In Canada, we have a lot of interesting projects on the go, but really the center of the action is down in the U.S. at the moment. We've got my lab working out of the University of Toronto in collaboration with the University of Waterloo, who've put a car on public roads this year. And we have large investments and testing centers for Uber and GM and Ford, all in the Ontario area.
And how close to a reality, even if you're talking about the States or you're talking about Canada, how close to a reality is it really?
It's coming quickly. So we already see fleets released in Phoenix, Arizona under Waymo that are driving, customers around autonomously. They even did some tests without a safety driver in the car. We'll see more testing, expanded testing by Uber, who is already driving, some of their customers around in self-driving cars. And so I think this is what we'll see first, is a lot of these sort of fleet-scale deployments in different cities, trying out the technology.
And how long beyond that before you or I can own one, do you think? I know it's an estimate, obviously, but for our viewers, what are we talking about? Is it 5 years, 10 years, longer?
So in the next 3 to 5 years, we'll see fleets in Toronto, I expect, where we'll actually get to drive in these cars and use them as a service. And then it'll still be at least a decade beyond that before they're a commercial product that we can buy and park in our own driveways.
Let me ask you about we're a politics show here, so some of the implications for the government and policymakers when it comes to self-driving cars. We've obviously seen some incidents. I'm thinking specifically of the Uber car who ended up hitting a woman who died. There are safety concerns generally, I think, for a lot of us who don't know a ton about how these cars will work. What kinds of policy implications are there for federal and provincial governments, do you think, as we look towards the future?
This is a big open question. We need to keep it open enough and accessible enough that technology companies will take the risk and try to deploy these systems, but we also need to make sure we maintain public safety. And so there's huge questions on how you properly certify that a car is ready, that it's safe enough, how many miles you need to drive to test that it's demonstrated human-level performance or better than human-level performance, how much evaluation or assessment you can do just on the algorithms themselves. These are really, there's a lot of aspects to this question.
Do you have any kind of assessment as to where the government is at right now? Are they, for example, from where you sit, involved enough in thinking about what these regulations will have to be, or is that still something they can leave to the future?
There's still a lot left to be done, but there's some really good progress being made. So there was a large Senate report last year on autonomous driving and what the impacts would be and how we need to regulate it. Ontario is one of the most liberal testing areas in North America, so it has the same sort of regulations as Arizona. Meaning that you can test basically on any public road given a simple application process and enough insurance. And so we see a lot of emphasis here, or a lot of excitement about this, and people in government are looking in the right direction.
Comparatively, when you look at, off the top there, I asked you what was happening in Canada, and you said kind of the crux of the action is in the United States.
Yeah.
Are we behind the ball at all when it comes to being able to develop this kind of technology? And I ask because during the whole conversation around General Motors closing its plant, of course, there were so many questions about, well, if that's the future, why can't they develop that here in Oshawa?
Absolutely. We have a lot of great talent here and a lot of great experience with artificial intelligence in particular, but we don't have one of these large tech giants or OEMs that's centered or founded here. And that sort of leaves us at a disadvantage. In terms of the government and regulation side, leaders in the US, California, and Germany actually have passed a lot of laws that take things a level beyond what we have in terms of permissibility. So we definitely can play some catch up on that side as well. But in terms of stimulating an industry here, I think we're doing all the right things. We have lots of incubators. We have lots of focus and funding from the government in terms of AI research. And those are the people, that kind of technology, that kind of capability, that are going to build an industry here in autonomous driving.
And beyond the US, you mentioned Germany. What other jurisdictions in the world are kind of at the forefront of this?
Germany, obviously, with all of its automotive manufacturers. Japan also has a strong presence through Toyota and some of the other manufacturers as well. So yeah, really, it's an international effort, but the biggest investments, the biggest players, and the furthest along are really Waymo from Google in the US, and then GM Cruise.
I don't want this to sound like an ignorant question, but you talk about 10 years from now or a decade beyond, whenever the fleets are out there. I think from a sort of layman's perspective, when I hear about all this stuff, I'm thinking, how long is it, and just based on conversations, how long is it before all the cars on the road are just self-driving automobiles? Do you think that there is a point during our lifetime that will happen? Is that sort of where the future is headed?
It certainly is, yeah. I do think it's the case that we're still at this point where it all looks possible and it all looks like it's going to work, but we don't know exactly how we're going to solve the safety questions and the final sort of reliability relative to human driving. But given that those answers become available, then yes, we'll see that within our lifetimes. It's at least a 15-year turnover in order to replace all the vehicles, and we'll need miles, millions and billions of miles driven to really be able to demonstrate that we've reached the levels of safety we need to remove human drivers at all.
And you actually tested a self-driving car that you built. How did it go?
It was great fun, yeah. So we had a team of 60 working for 2 years to build a baseline system, and we're able to drive 100 kilometers on public roads in the Waterloo region just in the month of August, and really demonstrated all of the capabilities we expected to be able to demonstrate quite reliably. So we were really happy with that.
Awesome. All right, well, thanks very much for your time, Professor Waslander. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.